The number on the screen was wrong, and Elle typed it that way on purpose. 16,000 metric tons of processed ore. She hit confirm. The Galactic Registry accepted the report without hesitation, without question, with the quiet efficiency of a system that had never once been given a reason to doubt what it received. She pushed back from the terminal, picked up her coffee, and walked. Theta 9's main corridor ran 300 meters from the command section to the far service hatch. It smelled like recycled air and machine oil, which Elle had decided, after 11 years, was the best combination of smells in the known universe. Not because it was pleasant, because it meant the machines were running. Running machines meant the schedule was intact, and the schedule had been the single thread holding 11 years of deliberate, absolute silence together. She passed Bay 1. Green indicator lights across the full panel. She checked them anyway, not from distrust, from discipline, the kind that does not require a reason to exist. You check the lights. You walk the corridor. You file the wrong number in the right format. You do not stop doing any of it until you are told that the time has changed. The platform was registered as Asteroid Mining Platform Theta 9, Category 7 Industrial, under the Vthori Resource Extraction Treaty of 2184. The registration was current. The license was valid. The compliance reports went in on time, every quarter, formatted so cleanly that the Vthori Administrative Review Board had once sent a formal letter to platform management commending humanity's procedural standards. That letter was pinned above Elle's terminal. She had her reasons. Bay 6 had a new seal on the access panel, installed 3 days ago after a pressure variance reading that turned out to be nothing and was confirmed as nothing by the new seal. She ran 2 fingers around the edge of it as she passed. Solid. Good. She moved on. Bay 9, Bay 10, Bay 11. Dana Fitch was crouched at the floor junction near Bay 11's power relay diagnostic reader in one hand, the look on her face that Elle had learned to read as, "I have found a problem, and I am currently deciding whether to report it or fix it privately and deny it ever existed." Bay 31 secondary relay, Elle said, not stopping. "Running warm," Dana said. "It's not dangerous. Fix it before 600. It's genuinely fine. Fix it before 600. She kept walking. Bay 12. She stopped. Rajan Patel was inside the bay with his tablet hanging loose at his side, not writing anything, not checking anything, just standing and looking upward at the shape suspended in the cradle above him. The shape rose from the floor to the ceiling and across most of the available width, wrapped in a signal-dampening shroud that the Vthori Collective had sold to human industrial facilities at a very competitive bulk rate, under the understanding that it was being used to manage ore processing emissions. The Vthori Collective had been very pleased with that contract. Through a gap in the lower starboard section of the shroud, a gap Elle had noticed 3 weeks ago and made a specific choice not to repair, the bow of the ship was visible. Dark alloy plate. No exterior markings. No registration numbers. No running lights of any civilian classification. The curve of the bow was not the curve of anything designed to process ore or carry freight or perform any of the 17 operations listed under the platform's industrial license. It was the shape of something built to make a decision permanent. Elle walked in, stood next to Patel. He said, in a voice that had all the air pressed out of it, "It is the most incredible thing I have ever seen." Elle looked at the ship. She thought about fire in thin atmosphere. She thought about a colony platform far out in the Kepler belt on a morning when the sky had still been the right color, and then was not. She thought about 6 hours of distress signals reaching the Galactic Council's communications board and sitting in a queue like any other administrative item waiting for processing. She thought about 11 days of silence, and then a formal statement in Vthori diplomatic script that used the phrase acceptable regional incident the way you use a phrase you have rehearsed, until saying it no longer requires you to think about what it means. 14 council members had voted for that phrase. One had voted against it. "Yeah," she said, "sure, incredible." She turned and walked to Bay 13. Patel followed. He was 22 years old, first deep space posting, and he had a face that still processed things in real time: shock, confusion, the specific disorientation of a person who has just discovered that the world is a different shape than the one they memorized. Elle found this quality simultaneously exhausting and necessary. Someone on this platform needed to still react to the scale of what they were part of. It kept the people who had stopped reacting honest. Bay 13 held a narrower class, longer in the engine section, designed for reach and velocity, and not for staying once it arrived. Bay 15 held a variant with hull plating so thick the overhead bay lights found its surface and gave up trying to reflect off it. Bay 19 had 2 units docked hull to hull with barely walking room between them. Bay 22 held a configuration that had taken 18 months of structural engineering argument before the frame design was approved, and looking at the finished result made the 18 months comprehensible. Elle walked, counted. The count was a habit from year 3 of the project, when the number had been small enough that she had needed to remind herself it was growing. She did not need that reminder anymore. The number had grown past the point of requiring reassurance. They reached Bay 47. The ship there occupied the space the way a geological formation occupies a landscape, not through effort, simply by being too real for the surrounding environment to diminish it. The hull plating had been the subject of 3 years of engineering argument, 2 formal revision proposals, and 1 senior engineer named Oliver who had taken a full week of leave not from exhaustion, but because he had been working 18-hour days trying to improve something that was, in his own written assessment, already as good as the available mathematics would allow. Patel stood in front of it. He did not speak for a full minute. His tablet had lowered completely to his side. "What class is it?" he said. Elle told him. The information moved across his face in sequence: disbelief, revision of the disbelief, a careful recalculation, and then something sitting just short of acceptance. "How many total?" he said. "All the bays, how many ships are there?" Elle told him that number. The coffee in her cup had been cold for several minutes. She registered this, assigned it the appropriate priority level relative to everything else currently requiring attention, walked to the recycler at the bay entrance, and dropped the cup in. "Sleep," she told Patel. "Inspection starts at 600. I need you at your station looking like a person who has been processing asteroid ore for 3 years, and whose inner life is both quiet and procedurally unremarkable." She walked back to the main corridor terminal, sat down, opened a new report form. The cursor blinked with the patience of something that had never had a reason to hurry. 16,000 metric tons of processed ore. She typed the wrong number, hit confirm. 8 hours. She had done this inspection 6 times before. She knew every step, where Val's team would stand, which questions they would ask, which answers produced amber throat patches, and how long amber lasted before it converted to the deeper, satisfied gold that meant the inspection was drawing to a close, and everyone had found what they expected. She knew the whole sequence. She went to bed. The Vthori inspection team arrived 1 minute past 600, which Elle had always found slightly endearing. Not late, not exactly on time. 1 minute past, consistently, across every visit she had experienced with this particular team. She had once asked Pete Garrow, the platform's external liaison, whether it was cultural, and he had told her it was individual. Val specifically had a habit of walking to a door, and then pausing for exactly 60 seconds before entering, which some Vthori behavioral literature described as a practice of composing expectations before observation. You decided what you expected to find. Then you went in and found it. Elle had found this information more useful than any briefing document she had ever received. Val's name translated from formal Vthori as something close to methodical assessment of valued resources. El had reduced this to Val. Some things required simplification to be survivable. He stood 2 heads taller than her and wore the deep green assessment division suit that indicated senior rank in the Vthori compliance structure. His 3 junior assessors wore gray and carried the handheld scanning units that El had spent 3 years making sure would find the right things in the right places. His bioluminescent throat patches ran a steady yellow gold as he stepped through the entrance and produced his clearance tablet. Yellow gold, ease, confidence, no expectation of complications. She had read about Vthori bioluminescent communication in a technical linguistics paper she had requested through an academic channel, so the request would appear educational. She had never mentioned, in any conversation with any Vthori official, that she could read throat patches. Chief Engineer Vasquez, Val said, right on schedule as always. We do our best, El said, and guided them into the corridor. She took them to Bay 2 first. The ore processors there were running a genuine load of belt ore. Dana had arranged the intake on Wednesday specifically for this visit. El had developed the operational principle early. The most durable cover is not constructed from pure deception. It is constructed from real things placed in the right locations at the right moments, and surrounded by documentation accurate enough to test. Val's assessors moved through Bay 2 with their scanning equipment and found exactly what the equipment was designed to find, because what was there was exactly what it was supposed to be. She offered Val coffee at the Bay entrance. Real coffee, earth-grown, the kind that cost 3 times what synthetic cost and tasted like an entirely different substance. He accepted it the way all beings accepted hospitality from species they had already decided were not dangerous. His throat patches had gone to amber. Pleased? El smiled at the amber. Bay 5 passed the same way. Bay 8 the same after that. Val's checklist moved through its columns with the efficiency of a system that had been running without complications for years and expected that to continue. He asked about the Bay 11 relay. Dana had flagged it in the pre-inspection maintenance log because an unflagged anomaly discovered by an inspector is worse than a flagged anomaly explained in advance. El explained the pressure variance. Val made a note. He moved on. By 8:40 they were at the corridor entrance. Val reviewed his completed form. His throat patches ran a slow, satisfied gold. Everything in order, he said, as expected. As always, El said. 3-fingered formal handshake. His team filed through the port entrance. She watched from the corridor window as their transport lifted from the landing pad and climbed toward the transit lane. She watched until it was a light among other lights. Then turned. Patel was at her terminal. He had not slept. She could tell by the specific quality of his stillness, not rest, but the motionlessness of a person who has been sitting in one place long enough that being still has become an act of will. He walked right past Bay 12, Patel said. He walked past everything on his license verification list, El said, which is the only list that exists from his perspective. His team had scanning equipment. They used it where the compliance documents directed them to use it. She sat down. That is what scanning equipment is for. You point it at what you expect to find something. The gap is not in the equipment. It is in the expectation. Patel looked at the table. El could feel him thinking, the specific weight of silence that belongs to someone turning something large over in their head, looking at it from every side. Who started the project, he said. Someone decided to do this. Someone called the first meeting and made the first decision. Who was it? El opened her maintenance queue. Bay 42's power coupling. Bay 17's cradle alignment, 2 millimeters off for a week. Bay 31 follow-up regardless of what Dana claimed. She thought about a room A real room in a building registered as a government records facility in a city that had nothing remarkable about it from the outside. Gray walls, a long table, people who had arrived at a decision before the meeting started and were there to formalize it, the specific look of people who have already paid a price and are now deciding what to do with what the payment bought them. Owen Clark had been at the head of the table, retired general, 30 years in Fleet Command. The kind of face that maps every possible outcome before entering a room and has already selected the one it will accept. He had said very quietly that humanity had two options, the Council's way or ours. Elle had not been supposed to be in that room. Her badge covered the building, not the meeting level. She had walked through a door that was unlocked because no one had specifically anticipated needing to lock it. Owen Clark had either not seen her or had seen her and decided she had earned her position at the back wall. She had listened to every word. She had voted with everyone else. She gave Patel the version that fit in 2 sentences. A general named Clark called a meeting, she said. We voted. Patel waited. That's everything, he said. That's the part that matters. He was quiet for a moment. What was the vote about? What made people agree to do something this large, this secret, for this long? Elle looked at her maintenance file. The vote was 14-1, she said. We were the one. She said nothing else about Kepler. She did not need to. Those 2 sentences carried exactly as much as she intended, and the weight of them was sufficient for any person paying attention. Patel sat with it. She watched something move through his expression, not grief, not anger, but the quiet recognition of a person who has just understood that the thing they are part of was shaped entirely by a loss they did not personally experience but now carry through its consequences. He did not respond. There was nothing to add. How many people know, he said after a while, not just here, across all the facilities in the network, how many people are part of this? Elle thought about the network. It was wider than Theta 9. Multiple platforms across the belt, each one registered under a different category, a different treaty, a different license type. Each one an individual entry in the Galactic Registry, unremarkable, compliant, awarded commendations for procedural standards. The people across all of them were not connected by formal briefing documents or classified clearance databases. The connection was simpler, harder to compromise. The kind of thing that does not appear in any operational security protocol, because it is not a policy. Everyone who lost someone in a regional incident, she said. Patel looked at the table. The recognition on his face deepened. He did not speak again. Elle stood, pulled on her work gloves, and walked into the corridor. Bay 42 first, then 17, then 31. The platform hummed around her, low and constant, the sound of machines doing exactly what they had been built to do. The indicator lights in the bays ran green. The ore processors ran. The tonnage reports filed automatically with the wrong numbers. Everything appeared as it was supposed to appear. At 1900, Nora Webb came to find her in Bay 38. Nora ran the platform's communications from a secondary control room at the stern end. She was compact, precise, and carried the specific manner of someone who has delivered accurate bad news often enough that it no longer registers on her face before it leaves her mouth. She handed Elle a printed message. Printed, not transmitted. Some things should not travel through digital channels even on an encrypted system. Elle read it. Read it again. Folded it, put it in her breast pocket. Went back to the coupling she had been working on. 3 more turns on the compression fitting. She tested the seal. It held. When did this come in? She said. 17 minutes ago, Nora said. Sent to all human-registered facilities in the sector simultaneously. Has Clark seen it? His confirmation came back 12 minutes ago. Elle set down her wrench. She thought about 47 bays. She thought about 11 years of compliance commendations and amber throat patches and wrong tonnage numbers in perfect formatting. She thought about the vote, 14-1. "All right," she said. She walked back to the terminal. The Scully Grand Admiral's transmission was 63 seconds long. Elle watched it on the screen above her terminal while eating a protein bar, halfway through the bar when it started, 3/4 through when it ended. The Grand Admiral was 12 feet tall in full ceremonial armor chrome played over a body that had been engineered by evolution and supplemented by military augmentation into something that looked as though it had been designed specifically to make other things feel structurally inadequate. His voice operated at a frequency that vibrated the air in a way that bypassed ear processing and went directly to the part of the brain that handles warnings about large falling objects. 3 inner system colonies, 72 hours to signal compliance. The alternative was described as corrective engagement, a phrase with specific historical weight that anyone familiar with Scully military archives could define in precise and unambiguous terms. Elle finished the protein bar. The screen returned to the facility management display. She opened a message window, typed 2 words. "Green light." Encrypted it, sent it to the coordination frequency, closed the window. She stood up and walked to Bay 12. The activation protocol was documented in a standing operations order she had written herself over 4 months, tested twice in low-power simulation, and reviewed enough times that it had moved from memory into reflex. She ran through it the way she ran through everything on this platform, methodically, without rushing, checking each step before moving to the next. Primary power couplings all bays, activate, confirm. Signal dampening shroud release, initiate sequence, confirm lock. Navigation arrays, initialize, confirm readiness. Propulsion systems, standby to active, confirm. She moved bay to bay with her tablet, watching the confirmation log populate. The platform around her changed its sound. The low, constant hum in the walls shifted upward by half a frequency as power routing redirected toward the bays. The corridor lighting adjusted as the system drew from secondary reserves. Theta 9 had spent 11 years pretending to be something it was not. It was done pretending. Patel was at his station when she passed the command section, watching the confirmation log on his own screen. His face had found a stillness on the far side of a large decision. "How long until the shrouds are fully clear?" he said. 22 minutes, Elle said. She kept moving. Bay 47 last. She stood at the bay entrance and initiated the final sequence. The signal dampening shroud released from the ceiling rails and dropped in sections, peeling away from the hull the way a long-held thing reveals itself when the reason for hiding it is finally gone. The dark alloy hull caught the bay lighting for the first time without filtration. It looked exactly like what it was. Nothing about it was ambiguous to anyone who understood what they were seeing. Elle watched the last section of shroud reach the floor. She had typed 16,000 metric tons of processed, or so many times her fingers did it from muscle memory. She had smiled at amber throat patches and answered prepared questions with prepared answers and walked this corridor counting bays for 11 years. She had been careful and patient and consistent in a way she had not been with anything else in her life, because this was the thing that required it. This was the thing that Kepler had made necessary. She confirmed Bay 47's activation status on her tablet. Checked the box. Walked back. The open communications channel on the secondary display was active. A broad-spectrum frequency, the Vthori deep space array used for regional traffic monitoring. Standard practice. They left it running at all facilities. Nobody expected anything unusual to appear on it. At 9:12, a Vthori array technician flagged an anomalous power reading from the Theta 9 grid sector, filed as possible equipment malfunction, pending follow-up. At 9:17, the flag was upgraded to confirmed anomaly with a query to the Regional Inspection Office. At 9:23, a second anomaly flag appeared 3 sectors away. Then another. then 3 more from different stations within 8 minutes. The channel traffic built the way storm clouds build, one piece at a time, each unremarkable on its own, until the accumulation made the shape impossible to miss. Elle stood in the corridor and listened. Nora appeared beside her, without announcing herself. At 9:34, the formality register of the Vthori communications shifted. Elle had learned the Vthori register levels from the same linguistics paper that taught her throat patches. There was administrative language. Above that, operational. Above that, a third register that had no polite translation in any human language, but which Elle recognized because it sounded like the specific moment before a quiet room becomes a loud one. They had reached the third register. Patel came out of the command section. He looked at Elle. He looked at the display. "Their fleet is repositioning," he said. "Yes," Elle said. "They're running threat assessment probability calculations." "Yes." For the third time in the past 8 minutes. Elle said nothing. "They don't believe their own numbers," Patel said. She had expected this. It was the natural response to data that contradicted a standing model of the world. You ran the numbers. The numbers came back wrong. You ran them again. The numbers came back the same kind of wrong. Eventually, the calculations stopped changing, and you had to decide whether to believe them. And that decision was the hardest one available to any intelligence, biological or artificial, because it required dismantling something you had already built your understanding on. The Scali Grand Admiral sent a second transmission at 9:41. Longer than the first. The chrome armor was present. The 12 feet were still 12 feet. But the frequency of his voice had shifted out of the register, designed to indicate that he was unconcerned about what was listening. He addressed the transmission to all human-registered facilities and asked for a representative response. Elle looked at the message. Routed it to archive. Unanswered. Then she walked to Bay 12 and ran a final check on the primary coupling of the ship inside, because the activation protocol had a verification step, and a verification step was a verification step regardless of what the communications channel was currently doing. The coupling was solid. She marked it confirmed. "Scali military fleet," Nora said from the corridor entrance. "Outer sector, moving to intercept formation." "Formation or engagement?" "Formation, they are still slow." Elle nodded. She had counted on the slowness, not as a tactical advantage specifically, as a feature of how minds work when reality disagrees with their model of it. The universe the Scali military had been operating in for the past 60 years was one in which humanity was cooperative, industrious, and categorically non-threatening. That model did not update in 9 minutes. It did not update in 9 hours. By the time the model updated, the position would be different. She walked back to her terminal, opened a new report form, typed 16,000 metric tons, stopped, looked at the number for a long moment, deleted it, left the form blank. She had filed enough wrong numbers. The next thing she submitted was going to be something else entirely. Elle spent the battle in the engine room. This was not a demotion or a punishment. It was the correct assignment for a chief engineer during active operations, because someone had to be in the engine room, and the engine room during active engagement was the kind of place that rewarded the most experienced and calm person available, since it was also the kind of place that, if not managed correctly, produced outcomes considerably worse than anything the opposing fleet could deliver. The battle arrived in the engine room as vibration. She had spent 11 years learning the ship through the soles of her feet, the way the hull transmitted sound and pressure, the frequency differences between normal operational stress and the kind of stress that required immediate attention. She had learned this the same way she had learned everything on this platform, by being present long enough that the information stopped being external and became instinct. The first impact registered in the deck plating as a deep, low pulse, not their hull, distant. She noted it, identified the frequency range, confirmed it against the threat assessment display on the engine room's secondary screen. Scali capital ship engagement, outer formation. She went back to the coolant flow rate on the portside drive assembly, which had been running slightly high, and needed a manual adjustment that the automated system kept declining to make, because the variance was within acceptable parameters, and the automated system was, in L's professional opinion, overly optimistic about acceptable parameters. The dispatches came through Nora's channel in short bursts. Scali forward cruiser group neutralized. Vthori support vessels retreating from sector. Allied fleet secondary formation breaking. Scali dreadnought class designation unknown, engagement pending. Elle listened while adjusting the coolant flow. She thought about Oliver and his 3 years of argument about hull plating configuration. She thought about the result sitting in Bay 47. She thought about 47 bays and 11 years, and the specific arithmetic of how long it takes to build something large enough to change what is possible. The vibration in the deck plates shifted, a longer, deeper pulse, not one of theirs either, but closer. She patched a thermal seal on the starboard conduit junction that the heat sensors had been warning her about for 30 minutes. The seal held. She moved to the next item on the list. Cal Bishop found her in the engine room at 11:17. Cal ran Bay 23, or had been running Bay 23, she corrected herself, because his showing up in the engine room meant Bay 23 was either stable without him, or he was here for a different reason. He was 31 years old, originally from Bristol, and had been on Theta 9 for 4 years. He took his coffee black. He had said once, during a shared shift break, that sugar was for people who had the luxury of being soft, and Elle had told him that was one of the least intelligent things she had ever heard someone say about sugar, and he had laughed and agreed, and they had never discussed it again. He stood in the engine room doorway, looking at the status displays. Bay 23, Elle said. Holding, he said. I needed to check something in the port drive manifold. It's fine. I'll check it anyway. She watched him move to the manifold panel and run the diagnostic herself would have run in the same situation, not because something was wrong, but because the act of checking something with your own hands, in a moment when the outcome of large things is uncertain, is its own kind of useful. He found nothing wrong, wrote it down anyway. Went back to Bay 23. At 12:03, Bay 23 went dark on the status board. Not a power failure, not an equipment shutdown, a specific kind of dark that Elle had been trained to read and had hoped for 11 years she would never see in a live situation. She looked at it for 3 seconds. The board did not update. The status remained. She went back to the coolant flow. She did not name what she felt about the status board. She did not have a name for it that fit in the same category as anything that could be said aloud. She had a name for Cal's coffee preference. She had a name for the way he had laughed about sugar. She held those instead. The vibration in the deck plates ran longer now, more complex, overlapping frequencies from multiple directions. The battle had spread from the outer formation into the mid-range, which meant the repositioning phase was done and both sides had committed. She managed 3 separate alerts in the next 40 minutes. A pressure drop in the secondary drive assembly, a power routing conflict between 2 base systems that had never been designed to run simultaneously at full capacity, and the coolant flow issue that she finally resolved with a manual override, and a short explanation to the automated system about the nature of acceptable parameters. Dana appeared in the engine room at 12:51. She did not speak. She walked directly to the starboard conduit panel that Elle had repaired an hour earlier, ran her own check on the seal, confirmed it was holding, and walked out again. This was a normal Dana-Fitch interaction during high-pressure situations. Elle found it reassuring. The Scali Grand Admiral opened a communications channel at 13:18. The channel request came through Nora to El's tablet, flagged with the specific header that meant direct diplomatic contact, senior rank requesting human representative response. Elle looked at the flag. She looked at her coolant display. The flow rate was finally stable. She wiped her hands on her work cloth, sat on the equipment bench beside the secondary drive panel, and accepted the channel. The Grand Admiral's voice filled the engine room at a volume that had probably been calculated to use the acoustics of a command bridge to maximum formal effect. In an engine room with exposed pipes and recycled air ventilation, it sounded slightly less impressive than intended. He asked who had authorized the activation of an undeclared military fleet within registered civilian infrastructure. Elle thought about the room with gray walls. She thought about Owen Clark's face. She thought about a vote. The people who attended a meeting 11 years ago, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what incident had prompted the meeting. The vote was 14-1, Elle said. We were the one. She heard the change in his breathing. It was slight, but it was there. He understood Kepler. She had known he would. The Scully hegemony's historical archives contained the incident report. He had read it probably at some point in his career, the way officials who work with the council read incident reports, with the professional attention of someone cataloging information that has been formally classified as resolved. He had read it with amber throat patches, she thought. He asked whether humanity's intention was expansion, control, whether this was the beginning of a campaign to replace the existing galactic order with human authority. Elle sat with that question for longer than was probably diplomatic. We intend to be left alone, she said. We intend to have that intention taken seriously. He said nothing. She said, those two things are not always different from each other. She closed the channel. Went back to the coolant display. The vibration in the deck plates at 1347 shifted registers entirely, lower, slower, a frequency she had never felt in a live situation, but had read about in the tactical operations documentation as the specific signature of a large fleet formation ceasing active propulsion, holding position, not advancing. She noted it. Kept working. At 1412, the alerts on her board stopped coming. She sat in the quiet engine room with her maintenance log open on her tablet, and the status display on the wall showing a large number of green indicators, and one Bay 23 that was still dark and would remain dark, and was not going to update regardless of how long she looked at it. She wrote the post-engagement maintenance report. She wrote Cal Bishop's name in the personnel status field with the appropriate code beside it, and she wrote it in the same handwriting she used for everything else, and then she set the tablet down and looked at the opposite wall for a while. Sugar, she thought, is for people who have the luxury of being soft. She picked up the tablet. Kept writing. The ceasefire was declared at 300 station time the following morning, which Elle spent in Bay 17, correcting the cradle alignment that had been 2 millimeters off for a week and a half. She found out about the ceasefire from Patel, who came to find her in Bay 17 with his tablet and the look of someone who had been awake for 26 hours and was running on the kind of attention that comes from a mind that has been focused on one thing so long it has forgotten how to look away. He told her the terms. She listened while working on the cradle adjustment. The Scully hegemony had withdrawn the colonial demand. The Allied fleet had disengaged. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session at 200 and was currently in the process of convening a secondary emergency session to manage the output of the first one. They want to talk to us, Patel said. Elle set down her alignment tool, tested the cradle, 2 millimeters corrected. Of course they do, she said. The first 3 days after the ceasefire were, in Elle's experience, the diplomatic equivalent of a room where someone has just broken something large. Everyone moving carefully, avoiding the pieces, talking about other things while the shape of what had changed became clear to everyone at the same time. She attended 2 briefing sessions via encrypted transmission, answered the questions that had verified answers, and referred everything else to Owen Clark's team, which was fielding the formal diplomatic engagement from Earth. On day 4, she was asked to attend the Galactic Council's emergency joint session in person. Nora brought her the request in the same printed format she used for the green light message, and Elle read it and folded it and put it in her pocket and went back to her maintenance queue, and then 30 seconds later took it out again and read it a second time to make sure she had read it correctly. She had. She told Nora to confirm attendance. The council's chamber was on Vthori Station Prime, which Elle had visited twice before for licensing reviews, and which she had always thought looked like a building that had been designed by committee. Every architectural choice, the product of a long negotiation between species with fundamentally different ideas about what a ceiling was supposed to do. The chamber itself was large in the specific way that spaces designed to make attendees feel appropriately small are large, with a high central ceiling and tiered seating, arranged in a configuration that placed the presiding council members at an elevation that made looking down at witnesses geometrically unavoidable. Elle had been in spaces designed to make her feel small before. They did not work as well on her as they used to. She sat at the witness position in the center of the chamber floor and looked up at the council tiers without adjusting her posture. 17 species represented, 41 council members in attendance. She recognized 4 of the bioluminescent signaling patterns from the species she had studied. 2 were running amber. 3 were running a frequency she did not have a word for in either human language or Vthori diplomatic script, but which produced, in the part of her chest that processed atmosphere, a sensation like standing near the edge of something without a railing. The presiding council member opened the session with a formal declaration of emergency status, a recitation of the incident timeline, and a statement of intent to conduct a full review of human military capability registrations. Then the questions began. The first was administrative, a Scali council member, not the Grand Admiral, a younger official in standard diplomatic dress, who asked about the legal basis for the construction and activation of undeclared military assets within treaty-licensed civilian infrastructure. Elle gave the prepared answer, which had been written by Owen Clark's legal team, and was technically accurate in every particular while being strategically useful, in ways the questioner did not immediately appear to recognize. The second question came from a Vthori representative, middle-aged, throat patches running the gold gray of many years, faded the way bioluminescent patches fade when a being has lived long enough to have been surprised by enough things that the surprise responses have worn smooth. He asked, in a register that was not accusatory but was very quiet, how long had humanity been capable of this? The chamber went still. Elle thought about year 3 of the project, the small number, the count that had needed reassurance. She thought about the count growing, year by year, bay by bay, wrong tonnage report by wrong tonnage report, inspection visit by inspection visit, until the number was the number she had told Patel in Bay 47. She thought about the letter above her terminal, Humanity's Procedural Standards. "We have been capable of it," she said, "since the first time someone told us we were not." The chamber remained still. The Vthori elder's throat patches shifted, not to amber, not to gold, something she did not have a word for, a frequency she had not encountered in the linguistics paper or in any of the research material she had reviewed. She filed it under things to understand later. The questions continued for 3 hours. Military intention assessment, territorial scope, resource claims, alliance status, defense treaty considerations. Elle answered the ones with prepared answers and referred the others to Clark's team, and twice said "I don't know" in a tone that made it clear she had decided not to say anything else on that topic, which was a different thing from not knowing, and which several council members appeared to understand. During a procedural recess at the midpoint, Owen Clark appeared at her shoulder. He was older than she remembered from the room with gray walls. The years between that meeting and this one had placed themselves visibly on his face in the way difficult years do, not by adding lines so much as by removing something from behind the eyes, replacing it with something quieter and heavier and more settled. He said, "You handled the capability question well." Elle looked at the council chamber. The tiered seating, the high ceiling, the 41 representatives in their seats. "I told them the truth," she said. "That's why it worked," he said. He went back to his seat. The second half of the session covered a formal ceasefire protocol, acknowledgement of humanity's military presence in the galactic community, and the preliminary framework for a revised treaty structure that would formally recognize human defense capability. Elle sat through all of it and answered the questions directed at her, and drank 3 cups of the council's complimentary water, which tasted like it had been purified by a process developed by a species that had never encountered the concept of mineral content. When the session concluded, the Vthori elder who had asked the capability question was waiting in the corridor outside the chamber. His throat patches were running the unfamiliar frequency. He inclined his head toward her in a gesture she recognized from the Vthori formality register as something between acknowledgement and a specific kind of respect that is reserved for outcomes the observer did not anticipate. She inclined her head back. He walked away. She stood in the corridor for a moment, alone, watching the other representatives move through in groups, speaking in low voices, carrying the posture of people navigating a world that had been recently rearranged and was still finding its new shape. She thought about 47 bays. She thought about what she had not said in the chamber. She had not said anything about the other side of the asteroid belt. She had not mentioned the platforms registered under different categories in different sectors, each one with its own treaty license, its own inspection cycle, its own perfectly formatted compliance reports. She had not described the ships in those bays, which were a different class than anything in Theta 9's 47, built on a different scale for a different purpose, the product of the years of engineering knowledge that 47 bays worth of construction had produced. The galaxy believed it had found humanity's secret. She thought about the word cute and decided it was not precise enough. The session had uncovered the secret humanity had prepared for the galaxy to find, the one staged in the right location, in the right licensing category, under the right inspection cycle, with the right maintenance logs and the right wrong tonnage numbers in the right formats. The one that was real, absolutely real, every ship genuine, every bay genuine, every capability genuine, but which was also, in the specific sense of being the thing presented for discovery, the thing that existed at the surface of a much deeper structure. The galaxy had pulled back one layer. Below it, bays 48 through 112 sat in their cradles under their shrouds, in a different part of the belt, and continued to wait. Elle walked to the transit terminal. She had a platform to get back to. Patel was at the main corridor terminal when she arrived, 3 hours after her shuttle docked at Theta 9's port bay. It was late in the station cycle, and the lights in the corridor had shifted to their low overnight setting, and he looked like someone who had slept recently but not enough and had woken up to news that had rearranged something in his understanding of the situation. He told her what he had heard from Nora's comm summary, the Council's formal recognition, the treaty framework, the Scali hegemony's withdrawal from the colonial demand, confirmed and filed, the broader galactic reaction, the diplomatic transmissions, the emergency committee formations, the 17 species reassessing their standing models of what humanity was and what category it belonged in. It worked, he said, all of it, the whole 11 years of it. Elle looked at the corridor, Bay 1 through Bay 12 and beyond, all the way to Bay 47. She thought about Cal Bishop, black coffee, the luxury of being soft, a status board that was still dark and would not update. She thought about the vote, 14-1. She thought about a colony platform and fire in thin atmosphere and a formal statement in diplomatic language. She thought about whether the 11 years had been worth it. She thought about this for a long time, standing in the corridor while Patel waited. Then she said, "Some math you do, some math you live with." Patel looked at her. He waited to see if there was more. There was not. She walked past him to the terminal, sat down, opened the reporting system. The cursor blinked. A new message was waiting in the coordination frequency inbox. Encrypted, rooted from a registration number she recognized as belonging to a platform on the far side of the belt. In a licensing category she had never publicly discussed with anyone outside the coordination